Hello and welcome to another episode of TV on TV. I'm State Representative Tommy Vitolo. You're watching Brookline Interactive Group. Today is Thursday, September 23rd. And as you can see, I'm broadcasting from the State House. Today we have formal session a bit later today. And so we're recording the show in the morning. You're going to see it this afternoon, but we're happy you're watching. And today, my guest is the newest school committee member, Val Frias, but of course, first, the news. On Tuesday, President Biden gave his first speech before the United Nations, declaring a new era of United States foreign diplomacy and making a plea for global unity. The Department of Veterans Affairs has announced that LGBTQ veterans discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell will now be given a chance to apply for full benefits. COVID cases in Massachusetts continue to increase at a slow but positive pace, with breakthrough cases a little more than 1/3 of all new cases. As vaccination rates increase, we expect the breakthrough rate numbers to increase because, well, by definition, if 100% of people are vaccinated, all of the cases have to be breakthrough cases. Although the number of confirmed cases in Massachusetts continues to grow, statewide metrics on hospitalization, deaths, and average percent positivity appear to have leveled off, which is promising news. Still early days on Delta. We don't know if we're going to bend that curve today, tomorrow, next week, next month. But of course, we all need to do our part by being thoughtful in crowded spaces, in indoor spaces, and so forth. MCAS scores were down across the Commonwealth this year, with disparities between students of different backgrounds widening. In Brookline, the largest drop was in 6th grade, math, with a percentage of students who met or exceeded expectations falling from 79% to 66%. A new Brookline law banning tobacco sales to anyone born after January 1, 2000 will go into effect this Saturday, September 27. The bylaw was passed by Brookline Town Meeting in November 2020 and approved by the Attorney General's office in July. So that's the news. Not a lot going on. It feels like there's a lot going on, but in terms of news, it was fairly quiet, actually. So we're going to dive right in. It buys us an extra couple of minutes with our guest of the week, school committee member, Val Frias. Val, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Representative. It's good to be here.
And, we usually just dive right in, and I don't see any reason not to do that today. Also, historically, I ask folks, what have they been doing from birth until now? But you're actually a repeat guest on the show. You were on a few months ago. So I'll ask a slightly different question, which is like, how'd you get on the school committee? Remind us how that played out, because it wasn't the most direct path.
No, it wasn't. I didn't win the election in May. We had a good showing. Stephen and I had a great race together and are good friends. In July, Dimitri Anselm, who had been serving on the school committee and was reelected in May, resigned because he was moving out of town. So that left a vacancy, and those are filled by application process to a joint meeting of the select board and the school committee, and I was voted in unanimously at that joint meeting.
And I'll remind the viewers with a little bit of editorializing, I get to do that as my show. Some elections in Brookline and elsewhere really pit two people with very different backgrounds, very different personalities, very different politics against each other. And well, it's a democracy, and whoever gets the most votes wins. In my view, Val, your election was actually not like that, in that both you and Stephen have very similar perspectives on public education. And in fact, both ran really positive campaigns. Many voters were sort of frustrated they couldn't vote for both of you. And so it turns out, well, they get both of you, right? And I think it's a really nice outcome given the election that both you and Stephen ran, and given your background. So I'm excited that the school committee has both of you on, but you're on. And for folks who don't know, the school committee is not like meeting, an hour a month. School committee is intense. So tell us, how's it going? How are you finding the school committee? What's your weekly sort of experience been like?
I jumped right in. I sit on 3 subcommittees. So I sit on capital, government relations, and policy. We jumped right in with policy and capital. I think in my first week after being sworn in, I had 2 or 3 subcommittee meetings followed by a full school committee meeting. So we dove right in, and I've been going full steam ahead since then. So it's been 3 or 4 days a week, and I've been meeting with school leaders and educators and caregivers and students themselves to hear their perspective, and have been out in the community to really get that feedback that I started doing on the campaign and want to continue doing through my service on the school committee. The first piece that we came to at policy was actually the vaccine mandate, and I strongly favored the vaccine mandate policy, and we worked on that and advanced that through the full school committee, and that has been in place now for a couple of days for non-unionized employees, and it's in the required negotiation bargaining piece with both the BEU and AFSCME currently.
So we're going to dive into that in a few minutes, but I do want to ask about the other committees you're in, right? So tell us a little bit about the capital subcommittee, more generally, what you'd expect to be working on, and then if you're working on something right now, we'd love to hear about it.
Sure. So the capital subcommittee deals with all things building and maintenance for the schools. And currently there's, as most viewers know, there's a BHS project ongoing. The Driscoll School project has now begun and is in full swing. We had a groundbreaking ceremony about a week ago that was well attended, and the community is very excited about that project. So we review those on an ongoing basis. As part of my service on that subcommittee, I am now taking a greater leadership role on the Driscoll School Building Advisory Commission, as well as the overall capital subcommittee, and will be really digging into the Driscoll project. I'm a Driscoll parent. I have a child at Driscoll who will be there for the entirety of construction. So it's a good perspective to have and to bring to the table with the rest of the team.
And we're going to drill down a little more on the Driscoll issue. There's actually a super special town meeting in October, and that includes a warrant article about the Driscoll School construction. Can you give us the down low on that?
Sure. The October 5th meeting is a special town meeting that Select Board put forward, and on that agenda is a warrant article that would bring back the geothermal piece that was value engineered out of the project because of costs for construction having increased over time and over the process from the 2019 vote. And that was value engineered out, and it's brought back by warrant article by lots of our neighbors. And there's actually a public hearing at the school committee meeting this evening on that warrant article, which would bond for $4.8 million to bring geothermal back as the heating and cooling source for Driscoll.
And to provide a little context for the viewers, the decision point is not fossil fuel versus heat pump. In fact, town meeting has been very clear for years now that new buildings are to be heated with heat pumps. The question is air source heat pumps or ground source heat pumps. Air source heat pumps are less expensive to install, but they use more electricity to operate. Ground source heat pumps cost more money at the time of construction, but you save money every year in electricity. And so the question is, from a carbon perspective, from a finance perspective, from a budgeting perspective, where capital and operating behave differently, what's the right answer for our town? And town meeting is going to hash that out pretty quickly. Tell us about government relations, Sean, the government relations subcommittee. I don't practically know anybody in government, so I don't know how that would work at all. Tell us what government relations means for the school committee in particular.
So government relations, primarily it has been interacting with town officials, so with select board in particular, but we're looking at expanding that committee to interact more with our state partners and our federal partners, particularly as we look at the ARPA funding that's available and work through how in an educational setting, we want to prioritize those dollars and work with the town, the communities, the stakeholders, and the select board on utilizing some of those funds in the most equitable manner on educational issues. So that's going to be front and center for the Government Relations Committee this year.
And finally, you had started to talk about policy, but the policy subcommittee, I kind of want to start at a higher level. More generally, isn't it all policy? What's policy from the perspective of the school committee and this subcommittee? What are the kinds of things more generally you'd expect to be working on?
So we work on in policy, we work on the wellness policies, on things related to student issue sexual harassment, essentially any school, quite frankly, overall arching school policy. The panel 4 is meeting this week to discuss a potential vaccine mandate for young people who are age eligible for the vaccine. And it's likely that will come before us at some point for discussion. But really anything that has to do with broad activity that's going on in the school community that relates to a particular curriculum issue that we want ingrained as a policy rather than just a practice. Those sorts of things we want to really memorialize come through the policy committee. And we look for constituent thoughts and ideas on updating policies if they seem outdated in some way. So we also refresh policies and review them on a regular basis to make sure that they still hold up in the 21st century and in 2021 in Brookline.
So I do want to sort of jab at the vaccine policy a little bit. And my understanding is it is now policy that staff, that adults working in the Brookline schools are expected to be vaccinated, but it's never quite that simple. So can you give us a little bit of the details and help explain the difference between unionized and non-unionized staff, and maybe where we'd expect to see a different timeline or different expectations amongst the different groups of people who work inside the Brookline Public Schools?
So the vaccine mandate that the school committee passed is a very strong mandate that would require all staff who work in the schools and all large contractors and vendors who work in the schools to be vaccinated with one of the 3 that are currently approved in the US, those 3 vaccines. And of course, we have the religious and the medical exemptions that are legally required in that policy. It went into effect as of this past Monday for non-unionized staff. So it's currently in effect for non-unionized employees. As part of our collective bargaining agreements, it's required that we bargain with, in this case, AFSCME and the BEU on the impacts of that mandate, and that's currently underway. And I know that everyone supports this. School committee supports this. The community supports this. Educators support this. So I'm hoping that we come to quick resolution with both unions and are able to move forward with it in all due course and speedily.
Yeah, and certainly this is not a issue limited to the Brookline Public Schools, right? We have similar conversations at the state level. I think that Brookline's Deb Goldberg, the treasurer, really got out in front, and then Auditor Suzanne bumped it as well. Since then, the governor has also said, well, you know what? We expect our employees to be vaccinated as well. And they also have to go through the same conversations with the labor unions to make sure that that they iron out the details. In fact, today in the Massachusetts House of Representatives, we're going to be voting on rules about vaccine requirements for employees of the legislature, both staff and legislators ourselves. And the story, I think, is going to be, if you want to be inside the State House as an employee, you must be vaccinated. And we'll see how the amendments go and the vote goes today. But I think it's important policy. And just to state the obvious, or to ask the obvious, vaccines for students, like, nobody's ever required a student to be vaccinated to go to school before, right? That's never been a thing.
Of course, there have been immunization requirements. And in fact, the governor added the flu last year. That ultimately wasn't enforced, but the governor did add the flu vaccine for students last year. And yes, there are the regular immunizations that are required when you register your student for school. And all of those immunizations being up to date are required over the course of a student's academic career in public schools in Massachusetts. This is a little bit different because without a state mandate, that has to then go through the cities and towns in Massachusetts and be debated at that level and implemented at that level. But it is possible. Other communities and towns have done it, and we're looking at it. So, and I wanted to say, you had just mentioned the House, and in my day job, I run an elder services agency, and we implemented a vaccine mandate, and I have part of my staff is unionized, and so I went through that process about a month ago now with my own staff and my own union, and came out the other side of that, and that vaccine mandate is in place now as well. So it's in the private sector and the public sector.
So let's shift gears a little bit. Not only does Brookline have a new school committee member, right, with us here today, Val Frias, we also have a new superintendent, Linus Guillory. And so, in a sense, you're both new to the job that you're doing on behalf of the residents of Brookline. How's he doing? How's your relationship been? Tell us a little bit about him.
That's been great. He has been crisscrossing the town. He's visited all the schools. He went on the first day of school to, I think, every single one of the Brookline public schools for a visit. And in those first days, met with educators and has done walkthroughs and really is engaging with the community in a way that is really heartening to see. He's a very engaging guy. He is down to earth. He responds to questions of families and of the school committee, and is really all over the place. He rivals you, Tommy, in terms of being all over the place on the school side. He's really making a mark in a very short period of time, and I have great. I think he's going to do a great job, and I think he's going to be with us for a long time.
Well, I've had several really positive conversations with him, and I will add that he and I are both Southern Land Grant University guys. He's a Texas A&M guy. I'm an NC State guy, and so we don't tend to. Our football teams, our basketball teams don't tend to play each other very often, but we have that sort of that camaraderie of being from a large sort of agricultural and technical university in the South, and all of the culture that brings. So that's, we got that if nothing else. You mentioned it earlier, and it's a conversation that is coming up all over government at the local level and certainly at the state level. And COVID has forced us to think about this a little bit differently, of course, and that is around community engagement and the different ways in which staff and elected officials can engage with members of the public, hopefully in productive ways, not always, but hopefully as often as possible, hopefully in polite and appropriate ways as often as possible, not always. And so I'm wondering what your thinking is now that you are sort of in the front of the room instead of in the crowd, how that's going for you, how that's going for the school committee, and maybe how we ought to be evolving when we think about public engagement?
So I think that, so we're still having our meetings via Zoom, and we're still taking public comment, and at public hearings, taking testimony via Zoom. And I think for caregivers in particular, that's been a really welcome addition on the school side, because parents weren't necessarily able to get to town hall for public comment if they were preparing dinner and putting kids to bed and things like that, but they are able to get on the Zoom meeting. So in that way, it's accessible. There is some work to be done on making sure that lots of constituents in Brookline maybe don't have access to the internet. So we want to make sure that we're able for them to get information to us, and for us to get information to them in sort of non-electronic ways. So snail mail still works, and really getting out in the community still works, and being out and available at public events, and using this weather to really be outside and be at all sorts of community events, not necessarily school related, but at other community events, so that you can hear from people who maybe aren't always able to engage at a public meeting or on a public chat board or write an email. Although I will say that email is still available. My email is Valerie_Frias at psbma.org. And I'm always happy to take emails, and my cell phone is up on the website as well, on the town website, 617-270-8946. That's my personal cell, and it's up on the website. So feel free to call that as well. And I will, if I can't answer, I will call you back. That's a commitment I made when I was running, and it's a commitment I stand by.
I love it. I'm a little worried for you. Having spoken with many other school committee members over the years, of course, parents are going to be engaged, and Brookline parents in particular have a reputation for really ensuring a close relationship with their local government. And so I expect, as things ramp up, the number of emails and calls will grow. And look, there's only so many hours in a day. And so I would encourage folks who do communicate to weigh that, right? Be clear, be concise, make what you would like to have happen very clear as well. And have a little patience, because, I'll tell you, there are days that I receive over 100 emails from constituents in a single day, and we've got to respond to all of them and try to do so thoughtfully. So sometimes it takes a little time. I'm sure it'll take you a little bit of time sometimes as well. And so, my message to the viewers is absolutely engage. Try to be thoughtful and make sure that this item really is worthy of the ask. Right. I get it. Like, I wish we had more pepperonis on the pizzas at school, but maybe that doesn't rise to a letter to a school committee member. If it's your child, it certainly does. Right. When my son is like, I want more pepperoni, write the school committee, sit down, write the letter, 100%. But, so that engagement's important. And I'm hopeful that we continue to find ways to do it both online or electronically or virtually when that's useful, but also in person, because I do think being in person really helps. But I'm glad to hear you're not swamped yet. I'm sure things will continue to get more challenging. I do want to, I've been wondering about this. We've got a little extra time because the news was short. You mentioned the high school, you mentioned Driscoll. Pierce is kind of on the horizon, and if you're on Capitol, you're not maybe on the Pierce committee viewing. So maybe you can give us a little bit of sense on what you know about Pierce. And it's totally fine if you don't have all the details, at your fingertips or at the tip of your mind. But tell us about the Pierce.
I'm really just getting up to speed on Pierce. I'm working on really getting my head around Driscoll and going through all of the documents for Driscoll, looking at the high school, because that's obviously getting completed, and Pierce is up next, so I have to say that's the next place where I need to dig in. But with the warrant article coming up and with the public hearing this evening, I have to admit that I've been focused on really getting my arms around the architectural plans, the budget, the various votes that are coming up, and responding to constituents who are engaging around that project in particular.
So then I'll come back to Driscoll. And I floated this idea quietly to a few folks, and I've gotten, nobody said it's a bad idea. Nobody's run with it yet. So I'll float it with you, and I want to know what you think about it. We're building an entirely brand new building at the Driscoll site, right? We're keeping the old building, we're building a new building. And then once the new building is complete, students will move in, and then we'll demo the old building and build an even better play space and outdoor space for some learning labs and things like that. It's my view, it's my personal view, that we have a somewhat lazy, somewhat nostalgic view on building names, and that is we just keep them. And so we even have like a new Lincoln School and an old Lincoln School. I'm not so sure that's the right way. So my question to you is, what do you think about the idea of saying that the new building must have a process to choose its name? And if the process chooses Michael Driscoll, who, by the way, was a really interesting guy on the Brookline School Committee like 100 years ago. I think he was a professor at MIT, right? Like, there's a great case to be made for him. But it seems to me that people today who designed and built Driscoll, whose kids are going to Driscoll, who it's in their community, should be choosing the name, not people from decades and decades and decades ago who chose the name of the building we're tearing down. So what do you think about, just like we had for FRR, a process to decide what the name of the new building should be? And Michael Driscoll is one of the candidates. What do you think? So
first of all, I'll say that Michael Driscoll is the longest standing school committee member ever in the history of the Brookline School Committee by, I think at this point, 15 years. He has our next longest standing school committee member beat by 15 years.
I mean, Helen Charlowski's been on for like 30 years, so that's no joke.
I want to say he was over 50 years on the school committee. It's on the Driscoll website, but I believe it was over 50 years on the school committee. So it doesn't have the same historical issue that FRR had in terms of naming. That was there was a real imperative in terms of that name change that I wholeheartedly supported. That said, I don't think that it's not valid for the community now to look at other naming options, right? Like we have lots of buildings that are named after men, and that's a historical all over the country. That's not anything unique to Brookline. And looking at options is I support looking at options. I support having a naming committee to potentially look at that. And again, if Michael Driscoll wins, then great. But if it's someone else with different kinds of ties to Brookline or to education that people want to put forward, then I think it's worth hearing. Again, I think that all of this is worth hearing from the folks who live there, whose students go there, and who will go there in the future, and to make sure, again, this is a building for 50 to 80 years, and it's going to be a phenomenal building. And so we look forward to that process. I look forward to the process of real engagement on that piece.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with it being named the Michael Driscoll School. Driscoll clearly doesn't have the kind of ugly history that Devotion did. But in a sense, maybe that's why it's worth doing, is to open that conversation all the time and allow our community to evolve. I would also say that it seemed like the process of choosing Florida Ruffin Ridley was really engaging and valuable for the students at what was then the Coolidge Corner School. And so even just that process of learning some local history, bring Ken Listen from the Brookline Historical Society and engaging in something. And then the other thing that I loved about it was students, third graders, fourth graders, fifth graders got to make a decision that is literally in stone. It's in the building, and they're going to walk away and they got to change society. They got to do a thing that's real and permanent, and the adults went along with them. And I think that's really empowering. So think about it, I'll be excited about it, whatever it's called. It's a great building. And I'm looking forward to the students moving in and then getting that play space back. We'll see. Listen, Val, thanks for coming on the show. Folks at home, you've been watching Brookline Interactive Group. We had a great interview today with Val Frias, member of the school committee, and we look forward to seeing you next week. We'll see you soon.